So yeah, we talked to Rod Blagojevich for about 40 minutes, 23 days after his release from federal prison. Rod Blagojevich, in addition to being a husband and father of 2 daughters, served as the 40th governor of Illinois from 2003 until his impeachment, conviction, and removal from office in 2009. I'm basically reading his Wikipedia page here. He is a retired American politician and convicted felon. He was elected governor in 2002 and won re-election in 2006. He was impeached and removed from office for corruption, being convicted of soliciting bribes for political appointments, including Barack Obama's vacant U.S. Senate seat after Obama was elected president in 2008. Rod Blagojevich, our guest today, was convicted and sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. And on February 18th of 2020, President Donald Trump commuted his sentence after Rod served about 8 years, which ended his sentence about 6 years early. Since our show is very much a Christian entity that doesn't deal with politics, in fact, we go to great lengths to avoid talking about politics because we just don't feel like it. We don't feel like generally that's why people tune into us. And today's show is really no different. We talk to him mostly about Jesus and a little bit about food. So let's get on with it. Here's our 40-minute chat with former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich, which we recorded just 23 days after his release from federal prison.
Hello, how are you? Is this Jonathan?
This is Johnathon and Lindsey.
Yeah, morning.
Oh, hi, good morning, Lindsey. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for being on with us.
God bless you, brother.
God bless you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Well, just by way of setup, so I think some of our listeners might say it's a tad bizarre to have Rod Blagojevich appear on this show with our mission statement being, sharing hope in Jesus, one song, one conversation, one heart at a time. We want to talk in a minute about kind of the role that God plays in your life today. But first, we would love to know kind of along the lines of what would you say to people who might even say, I hate Rod Blagojevich, but yet they follow this Christian ideology of God where we're told by our leader to love your neighbor as yourself.
But that's a good question. That's a question that I would repeatedly ask myself and still do because, my Christian faith not only informs me to not hate anybody, but it requires me to be forgiving. And forgiveness is, easy in theory, but in practice, after you feel you've been harmed, and in my case, I continue to insist, and I know I'm right. I was sent to prison for practicing politics, not for any crimes. And so one of the challenges I had to face during my almost 8 years away was, particularly in the early time, was to get over the anger and to try to keep myself from being bitter. And among the many things reading the Bible did for me was to give me a better perspective on what I was required to do. And it brought me a kind of peace, the recognition that if Jesus could forgive those who did to him what they did, how could I hold a grudge against the people that did what little they did against me compared to what happened to Jesus who accepted the cross? So it's also a practical thing. It's unhealthy to hate anybody, and hate is a toxic poison that destroys everything that's good in the world. And you can't be the best person you want to be if you're holding grudges and you're filled with anger and bitterness. So those who, frankly, didn't support me or didn't like me or might even hate me, and I understand that in politics it's not unusual, especially when you take strong positions, I would simply say, I understand, nothing personal, but if you shouldn't really hate me so much because you'll hurt yourself, and it's really not the way to live. And if you want any kind of inspiration on finding the right way to live, I would suggest take a look at the Bible, read it carefully, slowly, as I was able to do in prison, in ways where I hadn't done it before because I just was so busy in the race of life that I didn't spend enough time in God's Word. And I must say, the biggest blessing that I received while in prison was the discovery that reading the Bible and kind of growing spiritually and treating it like daily exercise where you want to get yourself in good spiritual shape was a blessing to me, and it made me feel so much less alone, and actually over time gave me a sense that not only was I not alone, but there was somebody with me that was ultimately going to guide the outcome of what I was going through. And I truly believe I'm home because it was the hand of God that put together a variety of different circumstances and actually sent to me a young man named Mark Vargas, who was instrumental in working through the process to get President Trump to make the decision that sent me home.
Wow. Would you talk a little bit more? You said, you were so busy running the race of life. You were too busy really to kind of maybe focus on Bible reading. And we all are like that. We all have jobs and families and stuff, and we just get busy and we kind of neglect it. And then, there are people who listen to the show that probably have a certain view of politicians and what it is that you do on a daily basis. So what was it like to kind of be stopped for years and be in prison and read the Bible, and just like, what was it like to have to be stopped in running that race that you were running for so long?
Well, it was a dramatic change of what I was used to. But it was also something that, it's going through the refiner's fire and burning the dross.
Mm-hmm.
You go through that crucible of adversity. There truly is something to how it can shape you. Now, it could break you. It could also make you. Now, I'm not suggesting that I'm so much of a better person than I was before I left. I like to think I'm better. I'm certainly less prideful, I think. And I know, but I mean, one area where I know I was guilty, and that's probably way too much pride. And when you're once on a high mountain, and then you're brought down to a low valley, and a deep, dark valley at that, and you're all by yourself, away from the people you love most in the world, like my daughters and my wife, and the road home is so far away, you can't even see the flicker of a light at the end of the tunnel. All of a sudden, I picked up the Bible and began to slowly and carefully read it and think about it. And I would spend a lot of time walking the track, thinking about the things that I was reading in the Bible. And not only did I find comfort in it, but I found instruction and pride, working on being less prideful. And, when they take you away from everything you love in the world and you're put in a place like prison, that's a place that'll humble you. And I think that it was very good, actually, because it kind of brought me back to my beginnings. My mother and father never had any money. They were working people. My dad was a factory worker, and my mom worked, and they didn't own a home. So it wasn't like I came from any kind of great place. But, when you come from a kind of a humble beginning like that, and then you get to a high place, it's very, I think, human nature. You start to think maybe, you're better than you are, but you ain't so good, really, because we're all basically mortal, and we're all sinners, and we're all flawed. And so when all of that's taken from you and you're put in a place like prison, it's a wake-up call. And again, this is a positive thing that happened for me. And it also was good because I was able to learn more about the afflictions of other inmates and the suffering that they go through, and seeing past them, looking past them. In the visits, when my family would come, I would notice other families and see their children, see their mothers, and see the pain in the eyes of the mother. It's the mother because you could see the pain in the woman's eyes.
Yeah.
And then you'd realize that there are a lot of other people, not just you, who are going through what you're going through. And I think that was helpful because you can appreciate other people's suffering. And then the portion that, that so much of what embodies Jesus, and that is service, helping others. And I discovered that trying to just help people that were my colleagues in prison, even in little things, small things, brought me a joy that was actually really compelling. And so I learned a lot about humility. I think I think I'm less prideful, but I'll tell you this: my big challenge now is to not forget those lessons. And my big challenge now that I'm home and I'm starting to get busy again is to stay focused and understand what the most important priority is for me as a person, and that is to stay close to God and continue to try to draw closer. And my advice to anybody who's interested in hearing it is by reading the Bible slowly and carefully and doing it daily, I found drew me closer to God, made me understand Him better, gives me a better sense of where His voice is and what He's actually trying to tell us. And it's an invaluable lesson that I learned, and I would hope that others can find what I found.
Yeah. Well, that's so good.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm wondering, I think if we did the math right, it's 23 days now that you have been out of prison. And I'm wondering, you're talking about reading the Bible. I'm wondering about what Rod Blagojevich prays about.
Well, that's good. And, that's a great question. I want to say this. I always believed in God before this all happened. When I was governor, I prayed nightly. I prayed for guidance. And even though, I certainly was a person with a great deal of pride, I still mostly put my trust in God even then. But but I've learned even that on how to pray. I think I pray better. Jesus is asked by some of his apostles, how do you pray? And he was pretty simple. He described it simply. The Father knows what you want, and he instructed them in a very short, simple prayer. And the lesson I derived from that was that, my prayers tended to be supplications, more supplications than they were actually expressions of gratitude. Mm-hmm. Always asking for things. Seek and you shall find, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Ask and it shall be given. Well, I was good at that and still am. So I pray for the health and safety of my children and my wife. I still pray for guidance. I pray for wisdom, but I find myself, and I think, and I know I'm right, thanking him more. And even in the darkest moments in prison, when I was all by myself and we kept losing in court when we should have been winning, and he's one staggering disappointment, one staggering defeat after another, and my children are home and my wife. And what we thought was going to be my release, it wasn't my release. When we thought we'd win, we kept losing. And trying to reassure them, even in those darkest moments, as I drew closer to God because I would read the Bible, I found myself thanking him more often. And again, even thanking him in defeat, because for some inexplicable reason, I was always strong. I never felt weak. And though you're always you got to deal with the doubt and the fear that it always chases you, and try to keep despair away. In spite of all of that, I always felt strong, and I always felt in the end it would all come out right. I'm going to continue to do the best I can, try to be a better person, try to help others, try to teach my children and my wife some of the things that I learned, and that's going to be something that's going to require a discipline where I need to sit down with them and carefully, slowly, gradually share what I discovered with them, because I learned this too. Sometimes people come at you and they're too strong with it, and and maybe their method doesn't really, doesn't quite catch you. It might actually repel you because they're so strong in their creeds, but then you see how they live and their deeds don't match their creeds.
Right.
So I think one of the biggest responsibilities for those of us who, like me, who are proclaiming ourselves to be people of faith, Christians, is to live it and not just talk it. And
that's right.
And you can lose a lot of people if you can lose people who would otherwise come to God by them seeing you and seeing how, you talk a good game, but you don't do what you say. So that's another challenge that I have now moving forward. Is will I actually do the things that I say? Will I practice what I preach?
We can relate to you on those things.
Yeah.
100%,
Yes. You have that responsibility.
That's right.
To look up to you, right? Both of you.
You got it. Well, just like us and just like anybody, it sounds like you got plenty to pray about. I appreciate that answer. And, I think a lot of people think about, Rod Blagojevich, the governor, the politician, guy that did almost 8 years in prison. But, I'd love to hear you speak a little more on, too, like, Rod Blagojevich, the man, and regardless of whether or not people believe that you committed the crimes or not, you must feel just as a man, which I think a lot of people can relate to, that you would be, hugely misunderstood by a lot of people who say disparaging things. And I'm wondering what you kind of just wish people knew about you as a man. Like I'm thinking about, your wife and daughters and kind of the life you're walking ahead now.
I'm lucky and I'm blessed. I have love in my life. I love my children. I love my wife more than I love myself. And that love helped sustain me during my time away. That and my faith in God. Not only do I have people to love, which is inspirational and motivational, but they love me. And so I'm not that alone. but even if I was alone, here again, I never really felt alone. I mean, in the physical sense, of course, I did, and there were tremendously wrenching times being away for so long and home being so far away, but even in the darkest times, there was always a feeling deep inside that there was a higher power looking after me, and that gave me purpose. Dr. Martin Luther King used to say, the object of life is not what the Declaration of Independence promises, the pursuit of happiness. It is instead to do the will of God. And our responsibility for those of us who advocate that belief is to try to discern what God's will is. And after a period of time in prison, probably into the third year or so, I began to get a better sense of what his will might be. As we began losing in court again and thought we would win, there had to be a reason for why this was happening. And I think it was several things. I think one, it's part of the testing period, which is very much what the Bible teaches, that we are tested and we are challenged and our faith is challenged. And can we remain faithful in the midst of staggering defeats and disappointments? Or do you walk away from God and blame Him for your troubles? I never, ever felt that way. I never felt anything but closer to Him during those dark periods. And frankly, just feeling like it was all part of a plan and that I needed to be patient. Isaiah talks about those who wait on the Lord will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not grow weary. And so patience was another lesson that I learned in prison. I was compelled to learn it because I didn't have any choice.
Right.
But here again, I felt a closeness. It's very hard to articulate exactly how this feels, but all I can tell you is I was never weak in there. I was always very strong and very confident. Even in the darkest moments, I felt eventually it would all work out right, and I still do.
So
Love
good.
it.
So what's it like to be reunited with your family? I mean, practically speaking, like getting to know your girls again, getting to know your wife again, catching up on the years that you've missed and reconnecting. So like, what's your plan to reconnect with your family? Like, are you eating breakfast together, dinner together? Like, what are you doing for fun together? And how do you plan to try to at least make up?
Yes. Well, no, that's a great question. Well, this is a work in progress. And here again, the patience is part of one of the elements. My younger daughter, Annie, well, she was 8 years old when I left, and she's going to be 17 in a few weeks. She's now a junior in high school, and she's a very different person than the little girl that I left behind. And I'm very proud of her, both my wife and I. Both our daughters, again, they're a reflection of their mother, and Patty raised them both as a single mother for the most part. My daughter Amy, 23, she's got a bachelor's degree from Edinburgh University in marketing. Annie is doing well in school, so and plays the piano, and so they've been blessed to have a mother who's such a great mother who through the years of storm has been able to keep them focused on trying to become good people. One of the things I really want to do, and that is, again, I referenced it earlier, I want them to learn what I learned, and I want to be the instrument that teaches them this. And so I want to begin a process where we spend maybe a half an hour every day just going over portions of the Bible and discussing them. And my goal is to bring them along kind of slowly, not overload them. And they're busy. They're both very busy, especially my younger one has to go to school. She left early this morning. I see her off every morning now with her mother a little before 7, and she comes home at 4, and she's got a whole bunch of homework. So it probably this will be something that we'll start doing during spring break, which is coming up, and then kind of ease them into it without overloading them and chasing them away. But the simple things are what matter. I find myself now that I'm home finding it hard to leave them. Isn't that weird? I've been away from them for almost 8 years.
Yeah.
And now I'd rather just kind of sit in the TV room, let them watch their shows and read. I just like feeling them near me.
Yeah.
Is very comforting. And pulling myself away is actually hard. And it's kind of ironic because they're here and I'm here and And I've got a strange feeling that somehow my time is still limited, and I better get my time in with them because I have to go away again, and yet I don't. That's another kind of adjustment that I have to make. But they're all good. They're good adjustments. None of them are hard. And I consider myself very fortunate and lucky, and I frankly think the future is very bright.
I love that. Glad to hear that. There are people listening to our conversation right now in prison. There are so many people, so many correctional facilities within our listening area here throughout the state of Illinois. We've had the chance to do events at places like Stateville and others. First of all, I was just wondering what you would want to say to those people right now, hearing your voice.
Don't give up hope. There's a thing called hope time. They know what I'm talking about. And you got to have it because that makes it so difficult without it. So you get to keep hope alive, as the Reverend Jesse Jackson is fond of saying, is first and foremost what I would encourage my fellow inmates to keep. And then that would also say, and I think most of them probably know, try to focus yourself on positive, constructive things every day and have goals. You need purpose. And if you've lost all your purpose, remember the people that you love, and that alone will give you the purpose you need to kind of, get through each day and try to get home. For me, I must not forget that experience I've been compelled to have to endure. I must not forget the inmates and the strife and the struggles that they go through. I've learned the hard way, many hard lessons. Among them is we have a broken and frankly racist criminal justice system. And I think, frankly, as I discern what my purpose might be, what God's will might be for me, I truly believe I must, it's not even an option, I must add my voice and be as active as I possibly can be in the cause of criminal justice reform, to try to make the system more fair, more just, and more merciful. I mean, we have a real problem with over-sentencing. And I've talked about this example before, but it really shows how broken the system is. Joan Eyre, a friend of mine I left behind, 26 years in prison, African-American man, young man. He's done 11 years, going on 12 already, as a first-time nonviolent drug offender. First-time nonviolent drug offender. The average rapist gets a little more than 4 years in prison. That alone illustrates just how broken the system is.
Yeah.
But there's thousands of examples like that. But the absence of mercy is the absence of Christian charity. It doesn't exist with these sentences, and we've gone afoul in our country. But there's too many people in prison today who really are not a threat to the public. What they need is correction, and what they need is something constructive to be able to work on, and then what they need is a place to go when they're left out of prison. Because now, in way too many cases, once you're tagged as a felon, that F is a scarlet letter. You can't get a job.
Right. And
so many of these guys they went to prison young. They came from communities where they had disadvantage to begin with. The family unit was dysfunctional or non-existent. They didn't have any skills, and so they became drug dealers because that was what was the thing to do in that community, where you can actually earn a living and actually have a chance to, get a taste of a better life. That's one of the great ironies. But they have nothing to fall back on once they've made those mistakes. So there isn't enough instruction or correction within the prisons today. And I think they're going to discover that a lot of these guys, if they're given a chance, if someone puts faith in them, they'll work even harder to prove themselves, because they're going to be grateful for the confidence that somebody had to give them an opportunity to start their lives anew. So I hope to be active in issues like this, and I'll do everything I can to be active, because I feel like I must do that. I feel like this is part of what I think God would want me to do.
Yeah. I'm wondering what you think about this idea, not from a political perspective or, even with reform or anything like that. Our radio station and with some partners, we've had the chance to be a part of a couple of, Christian music concerts in prisons in Illinois. And we've had some really meaningful connections with people doing time, like we said, in Stateville and some other places, and plans for that to continue. I wonder what you think about the idea just of, bringing hope-filled live music into prisons, even maximum security prisons, when they let us.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I can't imagine why anybody would be opposed to that. I think that's extremely important. Again, here, I referenced the Bible, but the Bible in so many places, both the Old and the New Testament, talks about, prisoners. Isaiah speaks of freeing the captives, and
and remembering those in prison too, instead of forgetting them, remembering them, visiting them, right?
That's exactly right. And the Apostle Paul was he was no stranger to prison himself, right? So, no, I think that it's absolutely necessary, helpful if you can bring Christian music into the prisons to provide hope to the inmates, and the songs are so inspirational. I mean, I can sing "Amazing Grace." I spent a lot of time. I had a little band when I was in prison, and we'd sing some gospel songs, and that was one of them. "Take My Hand, Precious Lord" was another. "Lead Me, Guide Me" was another.
Tell me you did some regular Elvis songs, though, too, right?
I did. I did "Peace in the Valley" like Elvis would have, and Elvis did it a lot better. I mean, all of that would we had a chap. We had they provide you an outlet for religious expression in prison, the different denominations, but more of the inmates were of the Christian faith than the other faiths, and you can access the chapel, and the opportunities to go to the chapel were significant, and there was reading materials there, and music, even movies that you can watch. So, should there be more of it? Absolutely, and I can't imagine why anybody would be opposed to it. But I suppose there's some kind of a civil libertarians who are saying there's a violation of church and state. Are they actually saying that?
Not too much. It's a lot of the times it's finding the right connections, and it's
more about security,
scheduling, security, things like that.
Well, I'll make a campaign promise to you. Next time I'm governor, we'll be sure that wherever you want to go.
We'll have our people call your people. By the way, you're on record as saying the food in prison was just absolutely horrible. So what exactly was it? I'm sorry to bring this memory back.
Well, this will please your listeners. As taxpayers, you'll know that at least in this area of the federal government, they're not wasting money on buying good quality food. And it was not a good. The quality of food was not good, and then it was prepared by other inmates who, they did the best they could, but they're not exactly. I mean, most of them were not exactly schooled in any kind of lessons in cooking, so the portions were small. The quality of food is kind of, not the highest. They rush you through the meals, so it's not. You learn to eat fast, so it was very unsatisfying. However, that's another thing you learn. It's like it was not that big a deal to me. I love ice cream, and I've been eating a lot of it since I've been home. I got to watch it myself, but I once a week they let you buy ice cream at the commissary. I never would do it because I just felt like, as much as I like it, for some strange reason, I felt like maybe I just had to deny myself certain things that I like it while I was there, because it's not going to make me happy anyway, and maybe I just need to sacrifice certain things that I like and just wait. And so I would never let myself buy ice cream. It's really strange. I have a hard time explaining why that was until I got home. And so there is that ice cream that the inmates can buy once a week, but generally speaking, the food there not so good. Now, one of the colorful parts of that experience is that there's a black market in the prisons I was in, where food that comes from the kitchen is smuggled out of the kitchen, and then it's sold on a black market around the prison to inmates, and they can then eat more of it, or they can prepare it for themselves with the limited resources that are there, like a microwave. But if you want to lose weight, I'm not recommending prison for anybody, but if you're interested in losing weight, it's a good place to lose weight.
Speaking of ice cream, I don't know if this is new now that you've been back, but you're not all that far from Winnetka. Have you had Grater's ice cream, popular in Ohio?
No.
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah. That's good. Graeters. TERS.
Yep.
I
So
think.
just a little family jaunt up there to Winnetka, and that's where you're going to want to go. I understand that another thing that you didn't let yourself do was watch the beloved Chicago Cubs. Did I get that right?
Well, two reasons. Number one, you got that right. I didn't watch the Cubs as often as I would have otherwise because it was heartbreaking for me. It made me homesick. You know, we live not that far from Wrigley Field, and when I run from my house around to Wrigley Field and I come back, it's a 7-mile loop, and I've been doing that for years since we've lived here. But more than that, I grew up as a Cub fan, and so as a young boy, and used to go to the Wrigley Field way before they had lights.
Yeah.
And then my daughter Amy, my older daughter, you know, I was kind of hoping to have a boy, and then we had a girl. And by the way, after we had Amy, when Annie came, I was hoping we'd have a girl, not a boy. I didn't want a boy anymore. I wanted a girl.
Aw. Realize how good they were.
Exactly. But the reason I wanted a boy was I wanted to raise my son to share the love of the Cubs with me. And so when Amy came along, she was the one who shared that love with me. And so she would go to Cubs games with me all the time, and she really understands and knows the game. She could, you know, analyze the pitches. It's really fun. It used to be so much fun for us when I was governor. She was a little girl just to watch the Cubs games. And you know, I'd ask her, what would you throw here, Amy? It's a 2-1 count. You got a man on second. And look who's coming up next. And she would know the players, and she would give me an analysis on what kind of a pitch the Cubs pitcher should throw. And so all those experiences were profound memories for me. And then when the Cubs were on television in prison, especially in 2016 when they were great and they won the World Series,
right?
It was bittersweet. I'd see Wrigley Field and I'd be homesick, and I'd want very much to be with my daughter to watch the games. And when they got to the World Series against Cleveland, Amy wanted to come out on the Saturday and watch one of the games with me in the visiting room, but they wouldn't allow it.
Wow.
And I tried to get permission, but that wasn't allowed. So she was disappointed, so she couldn't come out. But I did see the last game of the World Series.
You stayed up late.
Yeah, and that ninth inning, the dramatic comeback after the Indians had hit a home run at the top of the ninth to tie the game. Typical Cubs. It looked like it was going to happen again. They were about to break your heart again, right?
Right.
Only that year was different. But the other thing in prison is that baseball is the politics of the televisions are very significant because there's not a lot that the inmates have, and who controls the TVs is a big political dynamic there. And if you're asking, when there's fights and people, you know, get violent with each other, it's either about the fans in the heat of the summer, it's over that, or it's about the TVs. And so, right?
Well, and a lot of people probably assume that, you know, you went to this pampering spa-like prison for people who are, you know, celebrities and things along those lines. But I've heard you say that, you know, maybe you're the only governor, which, you know, not the only Illinois governor to serve time, but the only governor who has been behind actual razor wire in a real prison, right? That's
correct. My first 32 months in prison, I was behind the razor wire. And, you know, there were 900 inmates there, drug cartel members, gangbangers, drug dealers, bank robbers. There were men there who committed murder. There were con artists. Maybe 2% were the white-collar group, which would have included somebody like me. So it was and you lived, it was a prison. And the home that we, you know, the buildings that we slept in and lived in were squalid places, tomb-like, like you'd see on television and movies. And we had these little cells, 6 foot by 8 foot. That was my home. I slept on the top bunk, and I would do push-ups sometimes in that little narrow space when the other guy was out of the bunk. It'd be a way to exercise, and that was a real prison. Now, and then they restrict your movements, and there's the politics of the prison where you've got these groups that they call them cars, and you ride with one car or another. There's a great deal of segregation among races and ethnic groups, more for not a pernicious motivation, but more for practical realities of trying to keep guys from fighting. So you want to be with your group. I never did that. Frankly, never felt I had to do it. I always felt somewhat a little bit. There was, they brought my life down so low and brought me to ruin like that. I frankly feared nothing when I was in any of those prisons. It was more, there was nothing they could do to hurt me any more than what had happened. And my focus was all about, using my time as a time of preparation and trying to comfort my family and trying to get home to them. So I never feared anything along those lines. But, inevitably when you live with a bunch of guys like that for a long time in close quarters, once in a while there's going to be disagreements and sometimes conflicts, and sometimes in a place like that, there could, fights will break out, and, they, one of the things they have that I learned early on was that when someone puts his boots on late at night, that means a fight's going to start, and you got to watch a guy who puts a lock in a sock.
Oh,
because
man.
They use that as a weapon.
Yeah.
And so some of the fights that I actually saw were actually, very bad. And but again, the whole experience is for a reason. And I think about it now, and it seems like it was 100 years ago, and it wasn't that long ago at all.
23 days.
Yeah.
We're about done here. We got to, Lindsey, what do we want to say about the hair thing?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I don't know, seeing a before picture and an after picture, and I just thought, oh, wow. So I'm wondering, was it stress? Were you dyeing it before and it had to go natural?
Both.
I feel like it's great either way, and just kind of wondering.
Yes. Well, it was probably maybe my 6th month into prison, and one of the guys was talking about, Gov, I always thought your hair, I thought you wore a wig. and I said, hey, man, there was nothing fake about this hair except the color.
Yeah.
And don't call it black. I told him it was sable brown, number 47D.
There it is. There it is.
Got to know what to buy at Walgreens, right?
Right. But anyway, so they don't allow that, and you can't have that, and that's understandable. So
okay,
we covered it up. It'd been covered up for a few years, and I never realized what was under it until I got my second haircut there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's fine.
There it was, and
I do the same thing.
No, but they weren't using the clippers on you or anything.
Well, yeah, both. And my last barber there, God bless him, my friend Jimmy Templeton, who was in there long sentence. Here's another example of a first-time nonviolent drug offender. He's just about at 20 years now that he's been in prison, and he was the barber at the camp. He's worked his way from the higher securities levels down to the camp, and he'll go home in less than a year. It's been a long, hard journey for him, but he was the last barber there. But these guys are not trained as barbers. They were drug dealers and other things, and so you do the best you can with them, and they're the ones, So and I'm not governor anymore, so I can't complain. It's just pretty much work with them, get the best haircut you can get. But frankly, who cares? Even there, that didn't even matter. Frankly.
Right? Yeah.
It didn't matter at all. But it's all part of the past, and let's see whether or not I can actually be what I hope and think I am, and let's see if I can keep the faith and be strong moving forward to try to discern God's will and to do God's will, and to be an instrument for good purposes. This is what I must do, and I must keep myself focused to do that while I try to build a better life for my family. I have a lot of catching up to do in that area as well.
Well, you're hearing it straight from Rod Blagojevich. We appreciate you spending all this time with us. There's so much to think about, so much meaning, so much substance for prayer, and we just appreciate the time you spent with us this morning.
Well, thank you, Johnathon and Lindsey, and I hope maybe one day I get a chance to meet you, and maybe, who knows, we could visit a prison together and bring a little joy to somebody's life.
I really like that idea. There's people got all kinds of opinions about you. We know that you have your friends and your loyalists, and we are people that love you.
God bless you. Appreciate you. Thank you very much.